Improvise, adapt, and overcome.
You can blow a hole in a mountain. That does not mean you killed what was inside it. And this week, Iran turned that distinction into a live fire demonstration. After a brief pause, Iran launched multiple ballistic missiles at U.S. forces on 28 July. CENTCOM says every missile was intercepted. U.S. and Saudi forces also attributed more than 30 drone attacks to IRGC-directed militias in Iraq. The next night, the United States struck dozens of Revolutionary Guard command centers, missile and drone facilities, coastal defense sites, surveillance systems, and maritime capabilities. That exchange does not prove Iran rebuilt its entire missile force. It proves enough of the system survived or was restored to find a target, receive an order, launch weapons, and force the United States to fire interceptors. That is the real difference between damage and defeat. Then, late Saturday, the next strike cycle stopped before release. President Trump said he canceled a planned attack after Iran and other regional governments asked for time to complete what he called the parameters of a deal. He said the terms would require the immediate reopening of the Strait of Hormuz and an end to Iran's nuclear threat. He also said Israel had joined the commitment while negotiators worked. Reporting indicated that the canceled operation could have targeted Iranian energy infrastructure in one of the heaviest bombing waves of the war. That target list was never officially confirmed, and the attack did not launch. That matters because military pressure is finally being tied to a political off-ramp. But don't call it peace. There is no signed implementing agreement for this new pause, no jointly released text. Hormuz has not been demonstrably reopened, and no one has publicly defined what ending Iran's nuclear threat requires. Iran also disputes Trump's account. Semi-official Iranian media denied Tehran asked for the pause and said its forces remained on high alert. A source close to Iran's negotiators said the strait would remain restricted while U.S. hostile actions continued. Iran's acting defense minister called the threats psychological warfare, but said Iran treats them as real and will not remain passive. Washington says a framework is close. Tehran's semi-official media says it did not request relief, and the Iranian government has not publicly accepted the terms Trump described. So what exists right now is a conditional pause under military pressure, not a verified settlement. That brings us back to the mountain. Satellite imagery indicates Iran cleared at least 50 of 69 assessed entrances at 18 underground missile complexes. Roads were repaved, craters filled, tunnel portals reopened. That's not propaganda. That's straight up engineering. It may take precision weapons, intelligence assets, tankers, aircraft, electronic warfare, and millions of dollars to collapse a tunnel entrance. It may take Iran excavators, concrete, asphalt, and time to reopen it again. Now, the bombing did real damage. Launch operations were disrupted. Production facilities, communications, ports, transportation networks, and air defenses were legitimately degraded. But damaging a capability is not the same as destroying it. A blocked tunnel is not necessarily a destroyed missile inventory. A reconstructed factory is not necessarily a functioning production line. And centrifuges inside a mountain are not the same thing as an operating enrichment plant. Now, there are 4 stages: repair, reactivation, reconstitution, and regeneration. Iran is moving rapidly through repair. The July 28 attack shows that part of the surviving force also reached reactivation. Reconstitution, such as replacing launchers, command systems, crews, and support networks, now that's harder. regeneration, restoring the industrial capacity to manufacture missiles, guidance systems, propellant, carbon fiber components, and centrifuges. Now, that's harder still. Iran can recover the ability to fire missiles it already possesses faster than it can recover the ability to manufacture replacements. The immediate threat can return before the long-term capability does. Now the cycle is clear. Clear, reconnect, launch, find, strike, assess, and prepare to restrike. Then diplomacy steps between the aircraft and the target. If the emerging agreement produces verifiable nuclear limits, inspections, safe navigation through Hormuz, a reciprocal halt to attacks, and consequences for violations, the bombing may have purchased leverage instead of merely time. But if close to a deal remains rhetoric, if the Strait stays restricted, nuclear activity remains opaque, and attacks continue, then the bulldozers keep moving while the aircraft wait. And the cycle begins again. Iran is wounded. It is not disarmed. The question is no longer whether we can hit these facilities again, because we all know that we can. The question is whether the administration can convert temporary military damage into a durable political result before Iran repairs what was hit and before the United States consumes the weapons required for the next fight, because the first strikes make the headlines. The agreement determines whether the shooting stops, and reconstitution determines what happens if it does not. Hello and welcome to the SITREP edition of the Carry On podcast for the week of August 1st. I am your host, Brad Colbert, the Iceman, and I have to say, it has been a chaotic summer personally. I've been traveling a lot, both for work and pleasure, and admittedly, I did skip a week of conversation with you all. I hope you'll forgive me. I was somewhat hoping it would be during a lull in hostilities with the usual merry men, but I was proven wrong, and in some ways right. You know, traveling as much as I have has reminded me of the outrageous growth in tipping culture. And if you wouldn't mind indulging me for just a moment, I'd like to share what I mean by that. But first, tonight's bevy choice is this Hudson whiskey. Hudson Whiskey, New York. It's a straight bourbon whiskey, and I gotta say, it's nice. It's drinkable. Yeah, there's a lot of crap bourbons out there. This is not one of them. I actually enjoy this one. Yeah, I mean, I definitely go towards others if I'm reaching for top shelf, but good mid-tier shelf, yeah, this isn't bad at all. So somewhere in the last, I don't know, 5, maybe 8 years, the folks that manufactured point of sale systems, or POS, as most of them in the industry are called, these POS systems, when you go to the counter and you go to pay for something, have now been tabletized. I don't know how else to say it. But instead of a person on the other end taking your card or money, it's now a tablet that usually pivots towards you to finish the transaction. Anytime there's any electronic point of sale, the manufacturers of those systems have integrated this automatic tipping screen or gateway that you have to pass through. And it doesn't matter what it is that you're buying. It's always there. And most of these manufacturers have made the default setting an outrageous amount. If I'm buying a cup of coffee and all you have to do is rotate your body 180 degrees, fill up my black coffee because that's how coffee should be consumed, and rotate back to me, I'm not giving you an 18% commission on the transaction. And that seems to be the ground floor. That's the bottom basement. The bargain level is 18%. Sometimes it's as much as 30. Or let's not forget, you can give a custom. And I have seen these on now automated, completely human-free transaction mechanisms. Like I was at the airport and I wanted to get myself a sandwich from one of those, self-serve little kiosks that are in the terminal. Yeah, it wanted me to tip. For what? I grabbed my own sandwich. I put it on the own register. It scanned it. I paid. Who am I tipping? And it got me thinking. No one tips me. I go about my daily work. I do my job to the best of my ability, oftentimes above and beyond. Nobody tips me. I don't have a tip jar on my desk. I don't walk around saying, hey, feel free to give me a tip on your Square or your PayPal or whatever point of sale. There's no such mechanism. So why does one segment of the industry, heretofore admittedly underserved or underappreciated, now, like, you won. You got an outrageous amount of minimum wage and you're getting tips. And I know there's going to be hate mail. Well, my manager takes all my tips, or I don't see a percentage of those, or we now distribute them to everyone in the house, the back, the busboys, the cooks, not just the waitress. Okay, great. Doesn't take away from the fact that this whole tipping culture has gotten ridiculous, outrageous. I'm not doing it anymore. I am not doing it anymore, okay? You'll get a tip if you go above and beyond, or it's at like an amazing level of service. And that usually corresponds to a length in time, right? I have to interact with you longer than the 30 seconds it takes to give me my black coffee. Okay, so that's me. You decide you. Rant over. Thank you. So let's dive into it. For this evening, we're going to add some details about the Iran buildup that's taken place. I also do want to talk about, and this is going to be a little wonky, so for the Pete Hegseth Iran war funding hearing, you may want to recharge your glass. That'll be about the halfway point. Then we're going to end with a pretty interesting attempt at a joint U.S.-Ukraine drone production agreement. So I do a lot of things in my life, a lot of different jobs. I wear a lot of hats, and there is occasion for me to have a touch point with the military drone enterprise. Let's just call it that, right? So I sort of have a little, not a big one, but a little peek behind the curtain in the U.S. defense drone program. And yeah, it's not cohesive and it's not great. And everybody's kind of doing their own thing. There's no like one size fits all solution for any of the branches. There's so many players, so many manufacturers, big and small, some doing great work, some doing mediocre work, and some just flat out scamming for money. So this is a story about a joint U.S.-Ukraine drone production agreement that has the potential to be powerful for the U.S. industrial complex. And it also has the potential to really suck, and we'll talk about it. But first, let me add a little bit of salient detail on Iran's reconstruction race. The latest phase, if you aren't tracking this, has produced both a demonstrated Iranian military reactivation as well as a contested diplomatic pause. So, on the 28th of July, Iran launched multiple ballistic missiles at American forces. So CENTCOM says they were all intercepted. U.S. and Saudi forces also attributed more than 30 drone attacks to the IRGC-directed militias in Iraq. On 29 of July, the United States retaliates against dozens of IRGC command, missile, drone, coastal defense, surveillance, and maritime targets. So it is this constant cycle of escalation back and forth. But it does show that Iran has an active drone, still an active missile capability. And we did not attrit it, I think, nearly as much as we had hoped. I was going to say as much as we have reported, but that's not fair. As much as we had hoped. So late August 1, President Trump said he canceled a planned new strike package because Iran and regional governments requested time to complete an emerging deal. I've heard a little bit of both on that. It was Gulf states that are asking the administration for a pause, and then I've heard it say that Iran was also included. They deny it, though, so who knows what the truth is on that one. But it was paused, and Trump said that the terms would require reopening the Strait of Hormuz and ending Iran's nuclear threat. CBS reported the canceled operation could have targeted energy infrastructure, but the target list has not been officially confirmed, so speculation. No final implementing agreement for the August 1 pause has been signed or jointly announced. A regional mediator told the Associated Press that the proposal would reopen Hormuz, halt regional attacks, return the parties to negotiations, end the U.S. naval blockade, and finally permit Iranian oil exports. The same official said no agreement had yet been reached. Iranian semi-official outlets denied that Tehran requested the pause. They said Iranian forces remained on high alert, while a source close to negotiators said the strait would remain restricted as long as U.S. hostile actions continued. Iran's acting defense minister said Tehran treats American threats as credible and is increasing readiness. So as of the reporting cutoff, no Iranian government statement had publicly accepted Trump's terms. Meanwhile, satellite imagery still shows rapid physical recovery. So by late May of this year, at least 50 of 69 assessed entrances at 18 underground missile complex appeared cleared. There is no verified evidence that Iran has restored full missile production throughput or resumed enrichment at Fordow, Natanz, or Isfahan. So the nuclear picture remains materially different from the missile picture. The most detailed public imagery assessment available found no evidence of resumed uranium enrichment and no reconstruction of destroyed above-ground centrifuge production facilities. Natanz still lacked primary and backup electrical infrastructure and industrial cooling. Tunnel access at Isfahan, Natanz, and Fordow remain blocked, or at least heavily restricted, and Fordow's principal entrances remain buried in the latest imagery that has been assessed. Pickaxe Mountain remained under construction and was not assessed as operational. But a new intelligence dispute has raised the stakes. Israeli intelligence reportedly believes Iran moved thousands of centrifuges into Pickaxe Mountain before the latest phase of the war and has shared that assessment with the United States. But the claim has not been independently verified. It is also not necessarily inconsistent with the imagery. A tunnel can contain stored centrifuges while still lacking an operating enrichment plant. Movement is not the same as installation. Storage is not operation, but they are still there. Centrifuges are not enrichment without power, cooling, vacuum systems, cascade hulls, feed materials, control systems, trained personnel, and secure access. You guys know your home centrifuge, you know what it requires. President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu discussed diplomacy, continued pressure, and the possible use of force during the July 28th meeting. Pickaxe Mountain was central to the discussion, but neither government publicly announced a decision to attack the site. The absence of IAEA access, that remains a huge intelligence gap, because without inspectors, there is no reliable public accounting for Iran's enriched uranium, centrifuges, or related equipment. And that has been the central argument for all of this, going back as far as the United States has attempted to restrict their nuclear program. Without verification, I mean, it's a trust but verify. And nobody trusts Iran because they're liars. There's a large difference between repairing nuclear infrastructure, storing centrifuges underground, and restoring enrichment. Those are not synonymous. So keep that in mind. They are rebuilding. At what pace, it is debatable, but they definitely maintain the ability to continue to escalate, continue to strike. Okay. So the Iran campaign, I mean, I want to call it a war, but I also don't. It's a campaign. It's expensive, and it is definitely attriting our stockpile of consumables something that we have also talked about on this program. And it's expensive, and it has to be paid for. Somebody has to pay for all these strikes. Oh, yeah, we do. We do. So let's talk about that. And in the process of discussing what the bill for this campaign is and why the Pentagon is asking for more money, we're going to talk about where that money is supposed to go and who decides where it is appropriated, so on and so forth. So in a Senate Appropriations Committee hearing, and anytime we're going to talk about the Senate, make sure you've got a glass because it's the only way you can anesthetize your brain to handle the bullshit that comes out of Congress. I feel better already. Pete Hegseth established that the Iran war has generated substantial, his words, not mine, substantial unbudgeted costs and is pressuring operations, maintenance, training, equipment replacement, and thinning U.S. munitions inventories. That case has strengthened. Since the hearing, Iran launched the aforementioned ballistic missile attack, and the United States conducted the aforementioned additional strikes. And a lot of the open source analysis estimated Patriot inventories below 1,000 interceptors and THAAD inventories near 250. Folks, that's really, really low. CSIS further estimated that roughly half of the pre-war Patriot, THAAD, and precision strike missile inventories and about 1/3 of several other heavily used strike and naval interceptor categories may have been consumed. Those are not audited Pentagon figures. The strategic problem is still real. The United States is burning weapons in Iran that it may need against China, Russia, or North Korea. Trump's August 1st cancellation of another strike may slow the immediate burn rate, but it does not restore weapons already fired, release defensive forces while the agreement remains unsigned, or erase maintenance and replenishment costs. A pause can reduce future costs, yes, but it doesn't cancel the existing bill, which is why Hegseth was on the Capitol trying to ask for more money. So Hegseth also failed to prove that the entire $67.146 billion, yeah, I took it out to 3 decimal places, you're welcome, Pentagon request is an urgent Iran war invoice. The administration is combining current operations, replacement of consumed equipment, long-term modernization, and industrial expansion and unrelated priorities, all in one thing. We're going to break it down because I think it's important. The White House's total request remains $87.596 billion. Hegseth's $37.5 billion estimate covered only unspecified aspects of the war through September 30th and included projected costs. Now, it predates the latest exchange and the canceled strike package. It is stale in both directions. Yes, escalation would raise the bill. A durable agreement could lower operating tempo while leaving the replenishment requirement intact. We'll come back to that. The Army's new 7-year PAC-3 MSC framework, which is worth up to $58.6 billion, shows that the Pentagon is building a multi-year inventory recovery architecture, not just paying the current war bill. That may be necessary. It still requires honest accounting. The Senate Appropriations Committee convened July 21 to review President Trump's June 24th supplemental request. Hegseth appeared with Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Dan Kane, and Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins, as well as Senator Susan Collins, who is chairing the hearing. So 4 numbers were given and all collapsed into one headline. The first is $37.5 billion. Now that's Hegseth's estimate for, and I'm quoting, certain aspects of the Iran war through September 30th, combining current and anticipated costs. The second is the $67.146 billion. That is the Pentagon portion of the White House supplemental. The third is $87.596 billion, the entire White House package, including non-Pentagon programs. And the fourth is approximately $95 billion, which is a separate House budget framework. I hope you're all writing this down. There will be a test. Not a final appropriation that instructs committees to develop a broader package. So, the $37.5 billion was never an audited statement of money already spent. Hegseth said it included projected expenses and covered only unspecified aspects of the conflict. The Pentagon did not publicly disclose the methodology, exclusions, or account-level bridge behind the estimate. Since the hearing, the United States and Saudi Arabia struck IRGC-directed militia sites in Iraq. We talked about that after more than 30 drone attacks over 72 hours. We talked about that too. I just want to put this in the context. So, Iran launched the ballistic missiles at the U.S. forces. CENTCOM then struck all of the sites inside Iran on July 29th that was in the target list. Okay. Every one of those actions adds cost. Aircraft sorties, tanker support, intelligence collection, air defense interceptors, precision weapons, maintenance, fuel, logistics, medical readiness, and base protection. So the $37.5 billion number should therefore be described as a dated planning snapshot presented on July 21st, not the current cost of the war. Trump's cancellation of the next strike package creates two sharply different cost paths. If diplomacy holds, combat sorties and offensive munition expenditure could decline, although deployed force, air defense, maritime security, maintenance, and replenishment costs, will they continue? If the talks fail, the reported energy infrastructure campaign and the Iranian retaliation it could trigger would push the bill far beyond the hearing estimate. The casualty picture has also become harder to follow. At the hearing, reporting said 18 U.S. personnel had been killed and hundreds injured. The Pentagon subsequently moved 4 recent deaths and associated wounded personnel into a new overseas operations category after formally ending Operation Epic Fury as an accounting designation. That's weird to me. I didn't know we did that. As far as the bean counters are concerned, Operation Epic Fury is done, and we're on to just overseas operations. Pentagon officials described the change as technical. Whatever the intent, the result is that the operation name no longer cleanly captures the human cost of the continuing hostilities. Both Congress and the public need a stable method for counting money, munitions, casualties, and operations across changing mission names. Otherwise, the conflict can continue while each new phase disappears into a different budget line, casualty category, or operational label. All right, so what is the Pentagon asking Congress to buy for them? Well, Hegseth divided the Pentagon request into 2 broad blocks. The first is approximately $21.3 billion for readiness and operations. His testimony identified roughly $15.1 billion for operational expenses, personnel training, and readiness, $2 billion to replace damaged or lost equipment, $1.7 billion for additional personnel strength, including medical staffing, $1.5 billion for fuel, $800 million for National Guard, Homeland Defense, Border, and World Cup support. You're welcome, World. And approximately $200 million for Diego Garcia and other operational infrastructure. On a personal note, yay for the Diego Garcia money. That is a great little vacation spot if you have the card to get you onto the island. Some of that is plainly associated with combat against Iran. I grant you that. Some is not. For example, domestic guard missions, the World Cup security, and broader homeland defense activity may be legitimate requirements, but they are not self-evidently Iran war costs. The administration is using one wartime urgency narrative to move several priorities through Congress. The second block is approximately $45.9 billion for capability acceleration. It includes $21 billion for munitions, $13.3 billion for operational and security support, including classified force protection programs, and $11.6 billion for drones, space-based tracking, satellite networks, computing, cyber capabilities, aircraft survivability, and MQ-9 systems, interestingly enough. Why would that be? Oh, I don't know. I thought we lost some. Where did we lose them? Oh, yeah. We lost them against Iran. Those are expensive. The detailed submission includes approximately $12.1 billion for classified programs, roughly 18% of the Pentagon request, and asks for $6 billion in additional transfer and reprogramming authority. This is not merely reimbursement, folks. It is a request for greater procurement speed, broader executive discretion, and a multi-year modernization portfolio under wartime conditions. The approximately $20.45 billion outside the Pentagon further demonstrates the point. The package includes Energy Department nuclear-related work, State Department and embassy security, Coast Guard operations, agricultural assistance, Ebola response, National Park Service funding, Penn Station redevelopment, Delphi pension relief, and other administrative and economic measures. Those programs are not automatically wasteful. They do make this something other than a clean Iran war supplemental, though. It is an omnibus bargaining vehicle wrapped around a national security emergency. Hegseth's strongest argument, quite frankly, was not troop payroll, and it was not political blame. It was operational readiness and munitions depletion. The United States entered a major regional conflict without enacted appropriations designed to absorb sustained combat operations. So those expenses must temporarily be carried by existing personnel, operations, maintenance, procurement, and working capital accounts. Hegseth warned that without the supplemental, the department could reduce training, delay maintenance, restrict exercises, and slow future capability development. Kane gave the more precise version. Military pay would likely be protected, but the department would protect it by shifting pressure onto maintenance, training, and future capability programs. So that part is credible. Combat flying hours, aerial refueling, naval operations, air and missile defense, intelligence collection, cyber activity, base protection, medical evacuation, and equipment repair, they all consume money very, very rapidly. But the munition problem is also very real, and the public estimates are serious. CSIS assessed on July 27th that U.S. Patriot inventories had fallen below 1,000 interceptors, THAAD to 250. That same CSIS assessment says the United States has used about half of its initial inventory of Patriot, THAAD, and precision strike missiles up to this point during the Iran conflict, with roughly 1/3 of the initial inventory of JSOM, Tomahawk, and Standard missile variants used for long-range strike and missile defense. 1/3. 1/3 of our inventory gone. Exact stockpile numbers, well, those remain classified. The numbers I'm giving you are all open source estimates. But the strategic point, even if we don't quibble about the numbers, it's sound. The United States is consuming weapons in Iran that would also be required against our big three, China, Russia, and North Korea. Iran does not need to empty every American magazine. It can impose opportunity costs by forcing the United States to spend scarce, expensive interceptors against attacks using cheaper missiles and drones. That is a cost exchange problem. It is also a theater allocation problem. And that problem is no longer theoretical. Because according to an August 1st Washington Post report, General Alexis G. Grinkowicz, who is commander of the U.S. European Command and NATO's Supreme Allied Commander Europe, sent a written warning to senior Pentagon leaders that he lacked sufficient naval forces to sustain the defense of Israel against Iranian ballistic missiles. Officials familiar with the correspondence said that without another Navy destroyer, Grinkowicz could be forced to prioritize defense of the United States homeland over Israel, which it's a binary decision. I mean, we're going to get the home country defended, but it does highlight how thin we are stretched with resources at the moment. The Pentagon has declined to comment, and European Command did not publicly confirm the private correspondence. This should therefore be presented as a reported command warning, not an official public statement. The reason one destroyer matters is that the Rota-based Aegis ships, they're already carrying several missions. They form part of NATO's ballistic missile defense architecture. They preserve readiness against Russia and have helped defend Israel from Iranian and Houthi projectiles. Meanwhile, a much larger U.S. naval force is committed to the Arabian Sea and Strait of Hormuz, with another destroyer operating against the Houthi threat in the Red Sea. Prolonged operations have also increased a lot of maintenance pressure. A destroyer, it's not just a boat, it's not a hull. It is a mobile radar, a finite bank of vertical launch cells, a trained crew, and a maintenance schedule. When it fires interceptors, its magazine shrinks. The Navy still cannot routinely reload those cells while the ship remains on station. So it must eventually leave the fight and return to port. The Pentagon therefore cannot satisfy Grinkowicz by moving money on a spreadsheet. You've got to pull the ship from another theater, extending their deployment, you defer maintenance, or you accept a capability gap elsewhere. And that is the significance of his warning. The Iran war is consuming not only missiles and money, but it is consuming the Pentagon's global risk margin. Trump's decision to hold the next strike does not immediately free those forces. Until Hormuz is actually open, all the attacks stop, and a deal survives implementation, commanders must retain missile defense and maritime assets against the possibility that the pause fails. And in my opinion, it will. But Grankowitz's warning also explains why a real agreement has strategic value beyond avoiding one bombing mission. Diplomacy that durably reduces the threat can return scarce destroyers, interceptors, crews, and readiness margins to other theaters where they're desperately needed. Another strike may destroy targets. A functioning agreement can release forces. I hope we see the difference here. The Army's July 29th contract action with Lockheed Martin reinforces the industrial base argument. The Army converted a previous one-year PAC-3 MSC arrangement into a 7-year framework that is worth up to $58.6 billion for fiscal years 26 through 32. It's a long contract. Lockheed has said that the plan would support tripling production capacity by the end of 2030 with an eventual target of approximately 2,000 interceptors annually. I don't think it's enough. I don't. But that is a major response to a very real shortage. It's also important not to misread it. A contract ceiling is not money already obligated. A production target for 2030 doesn't refill launchers this year. And a 7-year interceptor program is not a direct invoice for the current war. So Congress still has to appropriate funds. Suppliers must expand facilities, secure rocket motors, seekers, electronics, energetics, and long lead materials, then deliver missiles that pass acceptance testing. So the contract proves the Pentagon is planning for a multi-year inventory rebuild. Great. It also proves that the supplemental is partially about future wars. Also great. The first failure remains the unexplained gap between $37.5 billion and 67.146. See, I told you to write these numbers down, and I said that there would be a test. Let's call it a quiz. So why the difference? Well, the difference may include replenishment extending beyond the current war, industrial base expansion, classified force protection programs, drones, cyber and space systems, domestic guard and border missions, and preparations for future conflicts. Some of those may be worthwhile. But the administration still has not provided a public bridge showing how each dollar moves from incurred combat cost to projected war cost to replacement cost to industrial expansion to unrelated modernization. That missing bridge is the central oversight failure. The second failure was the troop pay warning. Hegseth repeatedly suggested that the department could struggle to pay service members without the supplemental. Kane gave the more credible account. Payroll, as we said earlier, would likely be protected, but they're going to rob Peter to pay Paul. And that means maintenance, training, and future capability programs is where they're going to get it from as they shift money internally. The danger is not that the troops abruptly stop receiving paychecks. It is that the Pentagon protects payroll by raiding readiness accounts, reducing flying hours, deferring maintenance, canceling exercises, or delaying procurement. Presenting the choice to this Capitol Hill as fund the entire request or the troops suffer turns an appropriation problem into a political hostage situation. The third failure concerned approximately $75 billion in unobligated prior Pentagon funding. Hegseth acknowledged the figure, but said he expected roughly 95% to be under contract by October 1. And without diving into the weeds about colors of money and the rules requiring funding obligations and how far out, without going down that road, because I don't have enough bourbon for that, suffice to say that there is $75 billion in unobligated money, and it has to be spent. It has to be spent by October 1st, or at least under contract by October 1st. That's a lot of money. And this is the thing that annoys the public when they hear these wazoo stories about $100 hammers, $1,000 toilet seats. It's not that they're actually getting either one of those for the price that you have. It's just you end up with this end of the year money and there's a scramble to spend it. We'll skip over that. It's weird. Unobligated does not mean idle, unrestricted, or legally available for Iran operations. Appropriations are tied to specific accounts and purposes. But it will be contracted soon is not an audit trail either. Congress needs an account-by-account schedule showing what is available, what is committed, what can be reprogrammed, and where the supplemental overlaps with existing funds. The fourth failure is overlap with the fiscal year 2027 budget and new multi-year contracts. So the PAC-3 framework, it may be necessary. Congress still needs to know which portion is financed by existing appropriations, which portion depends on the supplemental, which portion belongs in the regular 2027 budget, and whether any production capacity or missile quantity is being counted twice. Overlap is not automatically duplication. Unreconciled overlap becomes duplication. So the fifth failure is causality and cost accounting across changing operation names. The Pentagon's overseas operation category may be administratively defensible, but one continuing conflict should not disappear into several databases because the executive branch changed the mission label. The same principle should apply to money and munitions. The sixth failure was political blame in place of account-level justification. Criticizing prior administrations, earlier weapons transfers, or years of defense neglect does not establish that a current line item is directly connected to Iran, or that it's immediately necessary, or properly priced, unavailable through existing appropriations, or appropriate for emergency spending. The hearing, it required an audit trail, and too often Hegseth supplied a narrative. That's not Brad giving you an opinion. I mean, it is just the facts. I don't like watching C-SPAN, but sometimes I do it for you so that I can speak with some understanding of the situation for you. And yeah, it's not an audit trail. It's a narrative. And until this weekend, the Pentagon described what it wanted to buy more clearly than the administration described what the war was meant to achieve. It was refreshing. Trump's August 1st announcement, it did narrow that gap. He named two immediate conditions: reopen the Straits of Hormuz and end Iran's nuclear threat. I think both are good end states to have. That is progress toward an end state right there. But it's not yet an operational definition. Does the nuclear condition require zero enrichment, reduced enrichment, removal of the uranium, dismantled centrifuges, disclosure of Pickaxe Mountain, permanent IAEA monitoring, missile limits, or is it some combination of all of them? Does opening Hormuz mean a return to internationally recognized lanes, Iranian control of transit, fees, mine removal, an end to the U.S. blockade, restored Iranian oil exports, or all of the above, or a combination? And what happens after the first alleged violation? A regional mediator told the Associated Press that the proposal would resume negotiations, reopen the Strait, halt regional attacks, end the blockade, and permit Iranian oil exports. That resembles a political framework. But no final implementing text exists. And all of the Iranian outlets have denied key elements of Trump's account, while the government has not publicly accepted his terms. A strategy cannot depend on each side implementing a different agreement. The administration still owes Congress the sequencing, verification, enforcement, nuclear limits, proxy obligations, inspection regime, reciprocal benefits, and consequences for breach. Grenkowicz's warning adds urgency. CENTCOM's need for blockade, escort, and missile defense forces directly competes with European commands, Russia deterrence, and homeland defense requirements. A durable agreement could release scarce ships and interceptors back to the original mission. A rhetorical agreement that collapses would give Iran repair time while American forces remain tied down. The supplemental funds continuation, Trump's announcement offers a possible termination path. What remains missing is a jointly accepted and enforceable bridge between the two. The administration's leverage is straightforward. Few lawmakers want to vote against money described as necessary for deployed troops, force protection, or munitions. Supporting troops already committed to combat is not the same as approving the decision to commit them. And Congress continues to blur that distinction. On July 30th, the Senate rejected 49-50 a motion to advance SJ Res 181, which would direct the removal of U.S. forces from hostilities against Iran that had not been authorized by Congress. One vote. The House narrowly approved a roughly $95 billion budget framework by a vote of 216 to 214. That framework contemplated approximately $60 billion for the Pentagon, additional national security funding, agricultural relief, and election law provisions. It was not a final appropriation. As of, let's call it noon on the 2nd of August, the White House had requested the money The Senate had held the hearing, the House had advanced a framework, and the Army had announced a new Patriot contract structure. Congress had enacted neither the final supplemental nor a new Iran-specific authorization for the use of military force. And that arrangement is very convenient politically. The executive branch prosecutes the war. Congress declines to stop it. Congress moves towards financing it. Neither branch defines the enemy, geography, mission, duration, or termination conditions. That is not accountability. It is shared evasion. Congress should not reject the operational requirement, but it should reject the accounting fog. First, rapidly fund and fence direct combat operations, military personnel and casualty support, medical evacuation, equipment repair and replacement, force protection, documented fuel and transportation, and munitions already expended or immediately required. Second, separate the remainder into direct Iran war costs, replacement and replenishment, long-term industrial base and modernization investment, and unrelated domestic or administrative priorities. Number 3, subject the classified block and transfer authority to advanced notification, account level reporting, inspector general review, expiration dates, and limits on transfers into unrelated programs. Fourth, reconcile every accelerated purchase against the final fiscal year 27 appropriation to prevent double funding. Fifth, require one consolidated public accounting system for casualties, costs, operations, and munition consumption across all of these mission name changes. And lastly, debate a specific Iran AUMF defining the authorized enemy, geographic limits, permitted munitions, conditions for expansion, reporting requirements, a sunset provision, and the political objectives that would end the hostilities. Paying for a war without defining it is how temporary operations become permanent commitments. And if you're wondering how I know that, check with your Afghanistan history. Now, the Pentagon needs additional money. I get it. War consumes fuel, interceptors, precision weapons, aircraft hours, maintenance capacity, industrial capacity, and human endurance. The renewed exchange, Greenwich's reported warning, and public estimates of depleted inventories make that requirement credible. Trump's decision to cancel the next strike is strategically preferable to another major campaign if it produces a verifiable agreement that reopens the Strait, reels in Iran's nuke problem, halts regional attacks, and releases American forces for other mission. That is the purpose of military leverage, not to bomb forever, but to create a political result that makes the next strike unnecessary. But saying a deal is close does not erase the war bill, refill magazines, return ships to maintenance, or substitute for written terms. The administration is still using a legitimate military need to seek a broader package than the publicly identified cost of the war. Reimbursement, inventory rebuilding, future weapons programs, expanded executive authority, classified activity, and unrelated priorities, all in one vehicle. And the Patriot framework captures the contradiction. The United States needs more interceptors. A 7-year, $58.6 billion contract ceiling is not the current war bill. And a missile promised for 2030 cannot defend a base tonight. Congress should fund audible operations, replenish countable weapons, replace documented losses, and invest in measurable production capacity. It should also require the administration to explain how any agreement changes force posture, projected costs, naval requirements, and the legal basis for continued hostilities. So pay the bill that can be audited, replace the rounds that can be counted, define the agreement, and define what happens if it fails. I honestly don't think that's a bridge too far. I don't think it's pie in the sky. I don't think it's too much to ask for, and it can be done while still maintaining our mission and still keeping our honor. I am not, and I've said this 1,000 times before, I'm not against, this is my opinion. I am not against what we are doing against Iran. I do feel that as a problem set needs to be addressed. Now, where I take issue is the methodology under which it was laid out and the fact that there was not an honest buy-in from the American people through our elected representatives. So before you say that I am way over here on the left, fuck you. No, I'm not. I'm not over here on the right. I'm my own man. I like what we're doing, but I don't like the way that it's being done. I think we owe some honesty, transparency, and self-assessment. So, yep, doing good on the bourbon. We're okay. I hope you are as well. All right, let's dive into our last story. Let's talk about this United States and Ukraine joint drone development. A lot of ins, a lot of outs. She probably killed herself. We know that. Kidnapped herself, sorry. This isn't going to be as wonky as the previous segment, so stay with me on this. The July 28th, Trump and Zelensky had a meeting. There wasn't a big public announcement after the meeting was done of a comprehensive drone production accord or any named joint factory or guaranteed production quantities or any final intellectual property terms. The official Ukrainian readout focused instead on licenses for Patriot interceptor production and renewed diplomacy. 31 July follow-up with Vice President J.D. Vance, again centered on air defense. But that doesn't mean that the drone initiative failed. It means that the government-to-government umbrella remains unfinished, while the industrial work continues underneath it. And I don't know if you saw on the news, but there was an American-owned drone factory in Ukraine that was struck by Russia recently. Apparently the first U.S.-owned, how would I say this? It wouldn't be company. The first U.S.-owned entity on Ukrainian soil to have been struck since the war began. That in and of itself was an interesting news article. 6 Ukrainian companies have reportedly been authorized to export roughly 100 drones each for the Pentagon's drone dominance competition. The Pentagon says it is approximately, its approximate $1.1 billion program will order just under 200,000 low-cost drones by February, while acknowledging that U.S. industry remains years from matching Ukraine's wartime output. I, honest to God, don't know how this is possible, okay? And I'm not in any way putting down the fine folks in Ukraine or their incredible adaptation to the war's constant evolution. No, let me be clear. America has a massive industrial base. I don't understand how that, coupled with the military-industrial complex, look at that, 2 squares on your bingo card, are incapable of matching Ukraine's wartime output, right? Here's a country who was smaller than the United States, has less GDP, rich in technology and capital, intellectual capital, but not as large of an industrial base. And while in a war on their home soil, managed to eclipse the United States drone output. And by several factors. That's a story in and of itself. Back to this one. So Ukraine is expected to produce roughly 6 to 7 million first-person view attack drones in this year alone. That's 500,000 per month. All 6 Ukrainian entrants invited into what's called Gauntlet 2 are moving towards U.S. production or joint venture arrangements because future Pentagon orders require localization. So company-level projects in Ohio, Georgia, New Hampshire, Oregon, and South Carolina, therefore remain more concrete than the still unpublished umbrella deal. The next decisive event is no longer the July 28th White House meeting, because that's come and gone. It is the Gauntlet 2 in August, so it takes place this month, and the production orders that inevitably will follow. The likely end state in all of this remains a distributed network of licensed production, component localization, software integration, testing, and procurement contracts, rather than one monolithic great factory. A new Russian strike reinforces the logic of that model, for example. In late July, a ballistic missile destroyed the Kiev plant of, and here's our U.S. company, Terminal Autonomy, a Delaware-registered U.S. defense company producing Ukrainian deep strike drones. No casualties were reported. Apparently, it was after hours, so everybody was gone, or they had advanced warning. I'm not exactly sure how that works. The attack, though, demonstrates that American ownership does not protect a factory located inside Ukraine from Russian targeting. The strategic transaction is larger than the purchase of Ukrainian airframes. The United States is trying to import Ukraine's battlefield learning cycle and place it inside a secure American manufacturing base. Ukraine is trying to convert wartime innovation into financing, protected intellectual property, production beyond Russian strike range, and a durable place inside the U.S. defense market. It's a win-win across the board, as far as I'm concerned. The Pentagon's Drone Dominance Program is a 2-year effort intended to procure more than 200,000 low-cost Group 1 one-way attack drones. Phase 1 produced orders for 30,000 systems. The official program timeline places Gauntlet 2 in August and states an intention to purchase more than 200,000 systems by 2027. Pentagon officials now say the program will have ordered just under 200,000 drones by February. Now that sounds pretty big until it's placed beside Ukraine's industrial scale. Defense Innovation Unit officials estimated that Ukraine will manufacture 6 to 7 of these first-person views. That's, again, 500,000 per month, if my math works. And I think it does. Our U.S. program, not even close to matching Ukraine's output. But it is attempting to build the first scalable American layer, at least of the same category. Several Ukrainian or Ukrainian-linked manufacturers have already entered that pipeline. F-Drones, operating through Ukrainian Defense Drones Tech Corporation, announced a major U.S. assembly and manufacturing center in Holland, Ohio. Welcome. The project is intended to support first-person view production, testing, training, software integration, and supply chain localization. Create at least 300 jobs and execute a prototype contract for 2,000 drones. Skyfall and Skycutter's jointly developed Shrike 10F fiber optic first-person view drone topped the first Pentagon Gauntlet competition with a reported score of 99.3. I will do my best in a follow-up SITREP to try and dive into a little more on Gauntlet, how it was scoring, what it looks like, because I think it would be interesting to look at. So Skycutter, which has manufacturing capacity in Atlanta, was subsequently placed under contract for more than 2,500 drones. General Cherry and Wilcox Industries announced plans for a joint venture producing FPV and interceptor drones in Newington, New Hampshire. That project remained in an approval and formal registration phase when announced, should not yet be described as a mature serial production. And that is cereal with an S, not like Cheerios. U-Force and Recon Craft signed a memorandum to manufacture Ukrainian-designed Magura unmanned surface vessels in the United States, adding a maritime branch to the relationship. Reporting from Reuters indicated that 6 Ukrainian companies received permission to export about 100 drones each for this evaluation. Government, not theirs or ours, has publicly identified all 6 firms or released the complete text of the reported statement of intent. So, going back to the July 28th meeting, it didn't close those gaps. No public United States or Ukrainian document has yet identified a single government-owned joint drone factory, guaranteed umbrella procurement quantities, final governance terms or a return flow mechanism for U.S.-made systems to support Ukraine. But it's coming. I think all of it is coming, and I think all of it is much needed. They need distributed manufacturing capacity. We are desperate to get intellectual property and some of these TTPs integrated into our infrastructure. But the major unknowns remain, well, there's a few. There's total government funding, guaranteed procurement quantities, ownership and governance, the site and structure of the factory Zelensky described, royalty and derivative design rights, control of source code, firmware, testing data, and software updates, re-export rules. That's going to be a fun one. And production schedules beyond existing company announcements. Those are not simple administrative details. Those are big because they determine who owns the technology, who controls the update cycle, who receives the revenue, and whether this becomes an industrial alliance or another memorandum that photographs well and manufactures little. It's somewhat on parity with the joint U.S. and Israeli defense initiative that we spoke about a couple of episodes back. Ukraine proposed a wider drone deal framework back in 2025, a multi-year arrangement involving technology exports, joint production, supply chains, training, research, and continuing financing. Kiev has described a preferred format lasting as long as 10 years and involving multiple contracts rather than just one transaction. Commercial arrangements and Pentagon procurement have moved faster than this umbrella diplomacy is capable of. From February through March of this year, the Pentagon launched its first drone dominance competition and selected systems for procurement. In April, Skycutter and Skyfall won the first gauntlet, with the fiber optic Shrike 10F demonstrating that Ukrainian battlefield engineering could survive an American acquisition competition rather than just generate favorable press. In June, F-Drones selected Northwest Ohio for its manufacturing center after obtaining a Pentagon prototype order. On July 1st, Kiev introduced a wartime export framework directing a portion of proceeds from finished defense products and exported components into a state defense fund. Manufacturers must demonstrate that they can satisfy Ukrainian military requirements while fulfilling export orders, and technology transfer doesn't automatically assign intellectual property ownership. U-Force and Recon Craft announced their maritime arrangement on 21 July. 600 drone evaluation package followed July 22nd. So good numbers and a lot of distributed testing and evaluation between a number of different people. And I think that's how innovation, but more importantly, production gets done. On the 23rd of July, the Pentagon published an updated supply chain framework, progressively removing Chinese and other covered country components, moving production towards the United States. Smart. Love it. Thank you. July 24th, Zelensky described U.S. production lines in a major factory using Ukrainian technology. A Washington source cautioned that details were still being negotiated ahead of the July 28th meeting. Meeting happened, broad public drone announcement did not. So the official readout focused on Patriot production and diplomacy. A July 31st follow-up with J.D. Vance continued to emphasize air defense, but it doesn't say that the drone talks stopped. It just proves that they didn't mature into a public document. So while all that's taking place, the Pentagon delivers a more important industrial admission. Defense Innovation Unit officials said the United States remains in the earliest and hardest phase of building a domestic drone industry and is still years from matching Ukraine's wartime output. I will say that that admission is phenomenal transparency. My hat is off to the courage and fortitude it took to basically say we are woefully behind what everyone knew, what industry knew, what the operator on the ground knew, and then to have it publicly announced like this, I think, is extraordinarily refreshing because now we can move forward to fixing the gap. All 6 Ukrainian companies that are invited into Gauntlet 2 are moving toward American joint ventures or production localization because U.S. manufacturing is required for future orders. So the pattern is now very, very clear. The diplomatic framework is unfinished. The acquisitions funnel, at least, is active. The localization requirement is binding. And the corporate scaffolding is advancing without waiting for one grand signing ceremony. The phrase hides joint production 4 different activities. First is the government framework. The reported statement of intent, it does create a legal and political channel through which Washington can request Ukrainian systems for testing and evaluation. The initial exports are for assessment rather than any kind of operational deployment. Second is the Pentagon acquisitions channel. Drone dominance, big D, big drone, big D, big dominance, functions as a competitive funnel. So companies bring systems, the Pentagon tests them under increasingly difficult conditions, and successful entrants receive rapid production orders. The approximate 600 Ukrainian drones reportedly approved for export equal only about 0.3% of the program's 200,000 plus targets. That is evaluation scale, not force generation scale. Third is American localization. The Pentagon does not intend to depend on large quantities of fully assembled foreign drones. Its supply chain framework progressively tightens requirements for final assembly, motors, circuit boards, communication links, batteries, optics, ground control systems, firmware custody, and payload integration. The scalable model is likely to be test Ukrainian systems, select the strongest design, establish American subsidiaries, licenses, or joint ventures, replace prohibited or insecure components, move assembly and increasing portions of the supply chain into the U.S., procure Americanized variants at scale. Yeah, that tracks. Fourth is multi-domain expansion. So drone dominance centers on small one-way attack aircraft, but the wider relationship includes maritime USVs, interceptor drones, potential ground vehicles, electronic warfare systems, command architecture, autonomy, and longer-range platforms. So the drone deal is an industrial category. It's not a single aircraft. American defense companies can build sophisticated unmanned systems. I know we can. But what we don't have or have not possessed at the Ukrainian scale is a continuously contested laboratory in which designs are tested against real jamming, spoofing, camouflage, air defenses, trench networks, counter-drone interceptors, and rapidly changing enemy tactics. Ukraine's advantage is not that every Ukrainian drone is better than every American drone. Its advantage is iteration under fire. Defects are exposed in combat every day. Requirements come directly from frontline units. Manufacturers alter hardware and software before a traditional American program office completes its next review cycle. The Pentagon's own comparison makes the gap very, very blunt. Drone dominance expects to order just under 200,000 systems by February. Ukraine expects to produce 6 to 7 million drones this year alone. The comparison is not perfect. The systems, mission, quality controls, payloads, acceptance standards, and production accounting between the two countries are very, very different. But the cultural gap is real. Ukraine has built an ecosystem designed to learn faster than the enemy. The United States is still building the contracting, testing, supply chain, and training architecture required to buy at comparable speed. So the hardware is perishable. The learning loop is the enduring weapon. The United States is also buying experience with low-cost mass. An expendable drone does not need to survive for 20 years. It needs to work under fire in sufficient numbers at a cost the force can replace. Ukraine also brings rapid electronic warfare adaptation. The Shrike 10F's fiber optic link responds directly to radio frequency jamming and spoofing. Other developments include terminal guidance, alternate navigation methods, optical tracking, frequency agility, and replaceable communications modules. Fiber optics are not a universal solution. They impose range, weight, terrain, maneuver, and logistics penalties. But the lesson is not the cable. The lesson is the willingness to redesign around the enemy's newest countermeasure instead of treating the original specification as sacred. Finally, Ukrainian participation pressures the American acquisition system. Combat-proven foreign designs succeeding in open competition exposes a very blunt truth. Parts of the U.S. defense industry have become optimized for navigating procurement rather than producing large quantities of inexpensive systems at battlefield speed. Gauntlet 2 will test whether the Pentagon can preserve the new model when the stakes rise, such as more vendors, stricter domestic content rules, stronger cybersecurity requirements, and larger production orders. Ukraine is not simply selling drones, it is commercializing a national wartime asset. Kiev estimates that its defense industry has approximately $55 billion in annual production capacity in this year alone, including more than 8 million first-person view drones across more than 160 companies. Those are official Ukrainian estimates, not independent audits, but they indicate the scale of the ecosystem Kiev believes it has created. Ukraine cannot fully finance that capacity from its own budget, so foreign orders provide capital, finance research, reduce dependence on direct aid, and place production beyond the reach of Russia's conventional missiles. And the last point became more concrete in late July, when that Russian missile destroyed Terminal Autonomy, which was a company that produced deep strike drones such as the AQ-400 Sith and the AQ-100 Bayonet. Although no casualties were reported, it does demonstrate the need to have distributed manufacturing, distributed logistics. It demonstrates that American corporate ownership doesn't create any kind of sanctuary, and Russia's going to continue to target the function of the facility, not the nationality on the registration documents. And that right there is one of the reasons why distributed production outside theater is so important. American facilities can preserve design teams, tooling, software repositories, component stocks, and production capacity beyond the reach of routine Russian missile attacks. They can also provide a lot of compliant semiconductors, cameras, communications equipment, batteries, quality control, and investment capital. But there's vulnerabilities. It's not all roses. Moving production capacity overseas means that knowledge can leave faster than value returns. So rightfully so, Kiev is drawing a line around intellectual property. Its export framework says transfer technology should not automatically assign ownership and should remain subject to use and re-export controls. Export activity must reinforce and not compete with Ukraine's own military requirements. Ukraine's drone knowledge was purchased with a lot of lives, a lot of destroyed infrastructure, emergency investment, and years of adaptation under fire. Giving it away for temporary political favor would be strategic malpractice. Ukraine needs guaranteed demand, royalties, or equity, derivative design protections, continuing access to improvements, and a mechanism for production to support Ukrainian forces. Otherwise, it risks exporting its advantage while importing dependence. And the hardest part of the agreement is unlikely to be airframe manufacturing. The Pentagon's framework progressively requires firmware and software repositories for flight controls, comms, nav, imaging, and ground control systems to be hosted, controlled, and audible by U.S. entities. Ukraine says its exported technology will remain Ukrainian intellectual property and subject to Ukrainian controls. But those two positions are not automatically incompatible. A U.S. entity can control an audible repository without owning the underlying IP. But the final agreement, however, it states it must determine who approves the updates, who owns American modifications, whether derivative systems can be sold to third countries, whether Ukraine receives royalties, who controls battlefield telemetry and test data, what source code access the Pentagon receives during a contingency, whether Kiev can withdraw a license, and who bears responsibility when a software update creates a failure or a targeting error. And that's real negotiation. So metal, carbon fiber, molded plastic, those are easy. The partnership is also part of a larger effort to really get away from Chinese component dependence. The Pentagon has identified a lot of Chinese choke points involving rare earth magnets, battery cells, printed circuit boards, flight controllers, motors, electronic speed controllers, cameras, and semiconductor packaging. And it creates a real hard trade-off because Ukraine's wartime ecosystem succeeded partly because it used a lot of commercial components and accepted imperfect solutions and prioritized delivery speed. The American system wants Ukrainian speed without Chinese dependence, while also demanding cyber, audibility, legal compliance, safe munition integration, and domestic production. And that's going to raise costs, at least initially. The danger is that Washington removes Chinese content, adds American compliance burden, and slowly turns a low-cost expendable system into another boutique defense product. If that happens, the United States will have copied the drone and destroyed the model that made it useful. Any immediate battlefield impact remains limited. There's absolutely no evidence that the statement of intent has suddenly placed tens of thousands of additional drones in Ukrainian units. The first approximately 600 systems are reportedly destined for U.S. testing. American production sites are at all different stages, and there's no publicly confirmed return flow agreement requiring U.S.-made drones to be supplied to Ukraine. Any near-term effect of any of these negotiations, it's financial, development, and political, but not yet quantitative. Gauntlet 2 that's going to take place this month is the first major opportunity to convert testing into repeated production orders. And all 6 Ukrainian participants are moving towards U.S. localization. But it doesn't necessarily mean that's combat power unless it's accepted systems at rate. Over 6 to 18 months, repeat orders could expand a lot of these first-person attack drones, fiber optic and jam-resistant variants, as well as counter-drone interceptors and maritime USVs. It could establish secure production outside Ukraine. It could generate revenue Kiev can reinvest. It can create a Western component supply chain and feed U.S. testing results back into Ukrainian designs. And then all of the benefits of distributed capability, but production abroad, it does require a lot of secure source code, trusted personnel, cyber defense, counter intel, and mechanisms. Because as we've seen, there's a lot of espionage that takes place on U.S. soil, predominantly from the Chinese, but they're not the only offenders. And I think this has massive positive potential. I think Ukraine has an exportable, their real intellectual property. It's not the hardware, it's the software, it's the experience. And I think in a Pacific Island distributed campaign, which is what we're looking for, this is going to be massive. This is going to help out any Pacific Island campaign. Ukraine's modularity, their rapid adaptation, autonomy work, production discipline, and willingness to treat drones as consumable munitions is one of the reasons why they have succeeded in this endeavor so well, and despite all of the roadblocks that have been against them. There are barriers to this program moving forward. There are some cons as well. One of the biggest concerns that I have is that American procurement will freeze the design. So a drone selected in August may be less useful 6 months later if Russian electronic warfare evolves. So whatever contracts established must permit continuous hardware and software modification without restarting certification. I don't know if that is capable. I don't know if we are capable of doing that. And is that hardware acquired without the operating system around it? Cheap drones still require trained operators, spectrum management, target data, electronic warfare support, munitions, batteries, charging, spare parts, command and control, all of it. So if you buy an airframe without that structure, it produces an inventory, but not capability. And that's part of the problem that current point and click drone procurement has at the unit level, is it doesn't come with all of that. So you've got a drone, but you don't have a capability. Yeah. So we'll take a look at this as it moves forward. I think that it has tremendous possibilities. Just remember that this is still not a completed government-to-government joint production deal. It is a convergence of diplomatic intent between Pentagon procurement, Ukrainian export reform, and U.S. manufacturing. So, yeah. Yep. So, let's see if we can't bring this all together and sort of tie in our stories, our three stories. Yeah. Before we do, I would like to answer a listener's question. I have two to choose from. I have them. All right. Let's see here. All right. So Sausage 40 actual. I like it. Can you speak about the difference between line training and McMap? And do you have an opinion on which was/is better? Line was before my time, but you hear a lot of injuries with McMap, perhaps being taught incorrectly. And I've heard people with actual martial arts experience saying it's not good. Okay. So both of these, line training and McMap, and hold on one second. So, line training, linear infighting neural override engagement. That's what line training is. McMap, a Marine Corps martial arts program, and they are two different styles. So, line training is what I experienced when I came into the Marine Corps back in '95, and I transitioned from line training to McMap. Line training is a fighting style. It's not really a style. That's wrong. It's not a style. It is a fighting technique or fighting techniques that you can use for hand-to-hand combat to immediately end a fight. This is one of the beautiful things about the line training. It was designed to disable your opponent's ability to think. I mean, I don't know why they called it linear disruption, because almost every move in the line training techniques were killing moves. I mean, heel stomps to the temple, throat. Like, I loved it because it was quick and it ended a fight, and it ended the fight in like the worst possible way. The problem, and this is anecdotal, I will give you my opinion. I liked line training. I thought it was very simple to understand. It was incredibly fast to execute, and it ended an argument like that, fatally, oftentimes for the opponent. Not always, but usually. But I think, and what I've been told is that's part of the problem, is that you had a couple of incidents where, a dumb private decided to get into a fight out in town and use his line training and really hurting somebody, like really hurting someone. It's designed for the battlefield. It is not designed for a bar fight, is the best way that I can say it. McMap, the Marine Corps martial arts program, combined, various levels of escalation. It combined character discussions. It combined like more of the Eastern philosophy of traditional martial arts into a progressive fighting style. You had belts, you had different moves that you had to demonstrate, and if demonstrated competently, you would go up in a belt, and your degree of difficulty would go with that belt. It wasn't bad. But see, here's the thing is, it had detractors, those that were purists of a martial arts style, whatever it might be, Tong Soo Do, Taekwondo, Jiu-Jitsu. You got to understand it's not designed for that. It's designed to teach 180,000 men and women in the Marine Corps combat tactics, fighting. They needed something to be able to defend themselves, unarmed combat on the battlefield, but also, instill a little bit of character, morality, physical fitness, self-discipline, all of the things that Eastern martial arts were supposed to do. But no, it didn't excel in any one area. I wasn't particularly fond of it, frankly, because it took a lot of work. Not that I'm opposed to a lot of work, but it took a lot. It sucked up a lot of time. It wasn't something that you could go out and in a couple of weeks' time be pretty competent on. It was a constant thing. You had to constantly practice. You had to constantly conduct the moves, and there were a lot of them. And I don't know. It just I liked line training better. It was simple. It was to the point. I wasn't going to go out and use my line training at a bar fight, although some of the moves, weren't all fatal, and you could apply them. Yeah, so good question. Line training and McMap. I like line. I've done them both. I think there's Marine Corps still using McMap. They've probably tweaked it a little bit. As far as I know, it's still there. So, yeah. All right. So let's wrap it up, shall we? We talked about 3 stories tonight. Different battlefields, but the same hard lesson. Modern war is not decided by who lands the first punch. It is decided by who can absorb damage, restore credibility, capability, replace what was consumed, learn faster, and turn military pressure into a durable result. Iran gave us the clearest example this week. A brief pause opened. Then Iran fired ballistic missiles at American forces. The United States intercepted them and answered with another heavy wave of strikes. That does not prove Iran rebuilt everything. It proves the system was never fully dead. Enough command and control survived. Enough launch capacity survived. Enough weapons remained accessible. Enough people knew what to do. The tunnels were damaged. The roads were cratered. The facilities were hit. But part of the force came back online. Then, late Saturday, the next cycle stopped before release. President Trump said he canceled a planned attack because Iran and other regional governments asked for time to finish the outline of a deal. He said it would require reopening Hormuz and ending Iran's nuclear threat. That is the first serious attempt in this phase of the war to connect bombing with a political off-ramp. But don't call it peace. There is no signed implementing agreement for this new pause. No jointly released text. Hormuz has not been demonstrably reopened, and no one has defined what ending the nuclear threat requires. Iran's public response also rejects key elements of Trump's version. Semi-official Iranian media denied Tehran requested the pause, said the Strait would remain restricted while U.S. hostile actions continued, and insisted Iran's forces remained ready. Iran's acting defense minister said the country would remain alert and would not be passive. No formal Iranian statement had accepted Trump's terms at the reporting cutoff. So Washington says a framework is close. Tehran's semi-official media said it did not ask for relief, and the Iranian government has not publicly accepted the terms Trump described. That is a contested pause, with both sides still holding the trigger. If ships move safely, attacks stop, inspectors return, nuclear limits can be verified, and violations carry consequences, without holding the strike was not weakness. Withholding the strike was not weakness. It was strategy. Another bomb can collapse another entrance. A functioning agreement can keep the missile entirely inside. But if the deal is only rhetoric, the pause becomes repair time. The bulldozers keep moving. The launch crews stay ready. The aircraft remains loaded. And the cycle begins again. Washington, is also carrying a larger bill than the one Secretary Hegseth described on 21 July. Since then, more missiles have been launched, more interceptors fired, more aircraft flown, more targets struck, more maintenance accumulated. The Pentagon's munition problem is real. Open source estimates suggest the United States has consumed roughly half of some critical missile defense and strike inventories. The Army put that 7-year Patriot framework on the table, worth as much as almost $59 billion. That is not a refill. It is an industrial recovery plan, and it will not put a missile in a launcher tomorrow. General Grenkowicz reportedly warned that without another destroyer, he may have to prioritize homeland defense over sustaining the current level of missile defense for Israel. That is not accounting. That is forced triage. And canceling one strike does not release that ship. Until Hormuz opens and the attacks stop and the agreement survives implementation, commanders still have to plan for failure. Hegseth's strongest argument remains valid, which is America needs deeper magazines. His weakest argument also remains. The administration has not separated the direct cost of this war from repairing decades of industrial weakness, preparing for China, funding classified programs, and carrying unrelated priorities. A real military requirement does not excuse bad accounting. And a presidential announcement does not answer every strategic question. What does ending the nuclear threat mean? Who verifies it? Who controls Hormuz? What does Iran receive? What happens after the first violation? What authority governs renewed bombing? Congress had another opportunity to force the authorization debate on July 30th. It failed by one vote. Diplomacy may now interrupt the cycle. But Congress should not confuse hope with oversight. Then there is the U.S.-Ukrainian drone partnership. The July 28th White House meeting passed without the promised great factory announcement. But the partnership is not dead. It is revealing its real shape, not one giant factory, but a network. Ukrainian designs, American subsidiaries, joint ventures, distributed production, domestic components, repeated testing, orders tied to performance. The next decision point is not another press conference. It is Gauntlet 2. America expects to order just under 200,000 small drones by February, while Ukraine expects to build 6 to 7 million this year. That is not only a technology gap, it is a production culture gap, a procurement gap, a learning speed gap. Russia underlined why production depth matters by destroying a Kiev drone factory owned by an American defense company. The passport on the incorporation papers did not protect the building. Geography matters. Redundancy matters. The ability to lose one factory without losing the capability matters. But moving production to America is not enough. If we move the airframe and leave the learning cycle behind, we sterilize the advantage we are trying to import, because the weapon is not the drone. The weapon is the cycle. Detect the problem, change the design, build the answer, return it to combat, learn what failed, do it again, faster. Iran is running that cycle beneath the ground. Ukraine is running it across its drone industry. And the United States is trying to finance its way back into the race while deciding whether another strike or an enforceable agreement best protects the inventory required for the next fight. That is the thread connecting all three of these stories. The wars ahead will be won by the side that can replace what it fires, repair what gets hit, preserve its industrial knowledge, negotiate from reality, and make sound decisions faster than the enemy. You can destroy a target. You can sign a contract. You can announce a framework. None of it matters unless it creates durable advantage. The first strike makes the headline. The agreement decides whether the shooting stops, and the reconstitution cycle decides what happens if it does not. I appreciate everybody out there that supported the program. If you would like to, please stop by and check out our Patreon page. We do have more content forthcoming. And as always, I will be here to shepherd the world melting down. So until next time, this is me, Brad Colbert, the Iceman, reminding all of you to stay frosty.
Improvise, adapt, and overcome.